We need to talk about the lies that Trump tells versus the lies that Christians tell. Christians like Mike Johnson and Caroline Levitt. Now, if this is the first time you're seeing me, I'm Rev Karla. I am an interfaith, interspiritual minister, and I am the author of Deconstructing Leaving Church, Finding Faith. Now, you can find this in bookstores, and you can also get a signed copy right here. I help people heal from Christian patriarchy and find a spiritual path after leaving church. And this is my vlog, Spirituality Matters. Let's talk about the beliefs of Christian Dominionists, because this is an important conversation. And I think this topic is important because I recently saw a comment where someone was saying how they could not see how Christians like Mike Johnson and Caroline Levitt, they're so comfortable with all the lies they tell. So I want to start this by telling a story. There was a contractor I knew once. He sold a lot and the sale was finalized, and he had sold this to a young couple because he knew the lot wasn't buildable, but he had locked himself into the contract where nothing was going to blow back on him. And he knew there was limestone just below the surface, so that made this lot just basically unbuildable, and it was going to be cost prohibitive for this young couple to blast through that limestone to create a solid foundation for a home that they would build someday, because they barely scraped together enough money to buy the lot for their future home. But you know what he said when someone asked him if he felt guilty? He smirked and he said, "They don't sit by me at church." And there it is. That's the cold-hearted, cutthroat deceit of a Christian who probably never misses a Sunday at church and faithfully tithes and prays. So you might be asking, how could a man who professes to love his God and worship his Jesus be so heartless to a young couple with a dream to build a home? The truth is, this is more common than you know. Among us who know these Christians exist and that their deception and greed know no depths, here's what we know. If someone has a Bible verse or a cross on their business card, run fast. Don't look back or think twice, because you are about to be swindled. Now, to some of you, that may seem cruel to view all Christians who profess their faith as part of their business brand. And if you want to do business with them, I say good luck. And I'm sure there are kind, honest, and hardworking Christians out there. But we're not talking about just any Christian. And we're not talking about just any belief. And we are certainly not speaking from conjecture. We have firsthand knowledge. We know who they are because we were them or we were harmed by them. Either way, we recognize that little glimmer in their eyes as they stand proudly and lie straight to your face. They don't have to be crafty in their lies. They do not care if you believe them. They only care that they are doing their part to uphold a system that will bring about such immense suffering that surely their Jesus will rejoice. Surely their Jesus will say, "It is time. I must return." Because at the root of this belief is the insidiousness of Christian dominionism, and that is what we are witnessing in real time. It's time to understand it and stop pretending that they will change. They will never change, because for a time such as this, they have prayed. And that is why Johnson's and Levitt's lies are so outrageous that they would be laughable if the reality weren't so gravely serious. Christian dominionism must be understood because it is the reason that people are perplexed about the lies Christians like Mike Johnson and Caroline Levitt spew. They are not the same as Donald Trump's lies. Trump has been a grifter since his father first propped him up and sold him to the world as a successful business tycoon. He's neither successful nor a business tycoon. What is he? He's a pompous, childish, entitled, corrupt man-child criminal who has bullied his way to power. But deep in the Bible Belt, where Christians believe that their actions can literally hasten the kingdom of heaven, there lies ground zero for the Christians who looked at Donald Trump and believed his soulless cruelty would please their God and quicken the pace that Jesus would return. They are not the same, but they will use each other for gain. They are the perfect match that ensures the suffering of millions, all while they raise their hands and praise the God that they have made in their image. Now, don't forget, Trump said that the new ballroom wouldn't touch the White House. And what's happened now? The East Wing lays in rubble because we learned that Trump lied to us in July 2025. But what else is new? At that time, he told reporters his new $200 million ballroom wouldn't interfere with the current building. He said it'll be near it, but it's not touching it. Now here we are 3 months later, and the East Wing of the White House is being torn down. Not touched, it's demolished. Excavators have torn through the walls that have stood since 1942, and they have pulverized one of America's most symbolic spaces to make room for what Trump calls his grand ballroom that apparently many presidents have wanted before him. And this is true Trump fashion. He has become annoyed with the backlash from the demolition because he can't stand to be held accountable. He and those loyal to him are pushing back on the historical significance of the East Wing, but more telling is his anger at being accused of deceiving American citizens. He says he has been transparent. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has begged the administration to stop, warning that the 90,000 square foot addition is going to overwhelm the White House. But their plea, like so many others before it, they're just ignored. And reporters' questions about it were mocked. When asked about the demolition, Trump reportedly told a group of senators, "Do you hear that sound? It's music to my ears." That's not renovation. That's not an improvement. This is desecration. And it perfectly mirrors the way Trump and his Christian nationalist enablers treat truth, faith, and democracy. They're merely things to be bulldozed when they get in the way of ego. Recently, I worked with ChatGPT because I wanted to understand how far in advance a demolition like this would have to have been planned. So I asked about the estimates for the logistics behind tearing down part of a functioning historic building. And even on a fast track, it would take months. There are engineering assessments and considerations, hazard removals, utility shutdowns, staff relocations, and structural protection for the rest of the property. This isn't something that you just decide to do in a matter of days. There's simply no way that this demolition happened overnight, which means that when Trump said in July it won't touch the building, he already knew. The plans were in motion. The destruction had been scheduled. But that's not the point. The strategy around the lie is the point. It was a deliberate misdirection to keep the public docile while the damage continued behind the scenes. This is the same playbook used by the so-called Christian leaders. They may use similar tactics, but their motivations are clearly different. Mike Johnson lies when he insists that Trump was ordained by God to save America, even as his policies strip people of rights and dignity. Karoline Leavitt lies when she calls Trump a man of faith, knowing he mocks the very teaching she claims to follow. Their deception is intentional, and it is theological in their biblical worldview. They have rewritten morality itself to serve a political messiah. And that's why this image of the East Wing collapsing, it feels more than just a deception or a construction story. It's a parable. Trump's ballroom is about idolatry. It's about the need to build monuments to himself at the expense of what's sacred. And the people who bless it with Bible verses are no different from those who cheered when golden calves were raised in the wilderness. This is about Christian values that corrupt Jesus. At the heart of the lies is Christian dominionism. And in America, at least with this side of Christianity, it has always been a political strategy and a theology of control. They are masters at hypocrisy. They contort scripture to justify slavery while saying words of Jesus that speak of welcoming the immigrant are taken out of context. And here is a real interesting hypocrisy because they will elevate women to power who are subservient to Christian patriarchy. But they will be behind enacting laws that suffocate the rights of other women who do not believe as they do. They are the ones who scream that the Bible is infallible and never changing, and be the first to scream metaphor when challenged by scripture that do not reflect their worldview. Now, for those of you who have never heard about Christian dominionism, it's important to understand the definition. This is the belief that Christians, specifically those aligned with a certain interpretation of evangelical conservatism, in other words, not all Christians are a part of the plan, and in their belief, not all those Christians are going to get to heaven. They believe that they have a divine mandate to rule over every aspect of society. So this is rooted in the idea of, quote, taking dominion, and it comes from Genesis. It recasts political power as a holy obligation rather than a civic duty. So within that framework, truth becomes secondary to divine purpose. purpose. If the goal is to establish God's kingdom on earth, then deception, manipulation, and authoritarian control can be justified as righteous tools in service to a higher calling. So to that end, lying ceases to be immoral when it protects what they believe is God's plan. That's how dominionism sanctifies dishonesty. It cloaks corruption in the language of faith. So dominionism teaches that certain Christians are divinely entitled to rule. This doesn't mean just in churches, but in every corner of public life. They believe and preach the Seven Mountain Mandate, and this is a belief that Christians should not only have influence in powerful sectors of life, but that they should dominate them. And those areas are arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, religion, and some now also include the military. Think of Trump and Hegseth in front of the generals and the leaders in the military. Yeah. So wrapped in this biblical language about taking dominion, it transforms power into a sacred mission and obedience into virtue. And once power is viewed as divine, truth becomes negotiable. And what does that mean? Lies are no longer sins if they serve the kingdom. Deception becomes a form of discipleship. What begins as a call to restore God's order quickly becomes permission to manipulate, to rewrite history, to ignore laws, and to destroy what doesn't submit. This is how corruption hides behind Scripture and how false prophets convince themselves that dishonesty in the service of God isn't lying at all. It's loyalty. They claim to defend Christian values while embodying the very corruption Jesus condemned. They preach about family values. Meanwhile, the policies of greed and exclusion that they support are crushing families. They declare God's truth while lying through their teeth, and they believe that God is smiling down on them. Christian dominionism twists the message of 2 Peter 3:11 and 12, where believers are urged to live holy lives as they, quote, look forward to and hasten the coming of the day of God, end quote. To them, that's a mandate for earthly conquest. Instead of understanding that passage as a call to spiritual readiness or moral integrity, Christian dominionists interpret it as a license to accelerate God's timeline through political control and cultural domination. In their view, seizing power, enforcing biblical law, and subduing secular society become sacred acts that help usher in the kingdom of heaven. This is a dangerous inversion. It's one that transforms faith from an inward journey of humility into an outward campaign of coercion, where even chaos, violence, and deceit can be justified as instruments of divine prophecy fulfilled. So Trump's lies about the White House not being touched is a metaphor for how authoritarian religion and authoritarian power operate. They will tell you that nobody or nothing will be harmed. They will simply lie and tell you that they're preserving tradition, or that they're protecting morality, or that they're making America holy again. And then, while you're not looking, they start dismantling the foundations, brick by brick, right before your eyes, until the structure is unrecognizable. That's how fascism works. That's how religious extremism takes hold, and that's how democracy is hollowed out under the weight of lies told in God's name. When I look at the rubble of the East Wing, I see more than the loss of a historic building. I see the cost of our collective denial. I see how easily people can be convinced that destruction is improvement, that arrogance is leadership, that deceit is divine. The sound of walls falling may be music to Trump's ears, but to those of us still awake, it's the sound of warning, because the White House isn't the only thing being torn down. Truth is being torn down. And if we don't start recognizing the pattern, there soon won't be anything left standing to protect us. Fascism is here, America. The time for movement was yesterday. But there is still time, and there is still hope. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. All right, my friends, that's it for today. If what I discussed today resonates with you, I invite you to check out my book, Deconstructing. It's not just my story. It's a companion for anyone healing from church harm or seeking something sacred beyond religion. And for those of you who want to go deeper or you want to read my writings, you can find me over on Substack, and soon we'll be starting a private discussion group for my Deconstructing readers. And also remember this, your spirituality is not contingent upon anyone's approval. Stay awake, keep deconstructing, keep asking questions, and stay connected. Talk to you soon.